Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, October 2nd, 2023. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for joining us. On the House floor today, Florida Republican Matt Gaetz amplified his calls for a change of leadership for the Republicans in Congress. His speech comes after multiple threats to begin the process to remove House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. The procedure known as a motion to vacate requires a simple majority. We'll hear what Representative Gaetz had to say coming up. Top Republicans are united in their support for Kevin McCarthy. Majority Leader Steve Scalise, Majority Whip Tom Emmer, and Conference Chair Elise Stefanik all saying today they back the Speaker. But just how real is the threat to Kevin McCarthy's speakership? We'll talk to NBC News' Scott Wong about it and the role Democrats could play. California's new US Senator Laphonza Butler says she is, quote, honored and humbled to fill the seat of the late Dianne Feinstein. California Governor Gavin Newsom announced the appointment early this morning. Laphonza Butler is the president of Emily's List, a group that works to elect Democratic women. We'll hear what people are saying about the appointment and go into the C-SPAN video library and hear from the Senator-designate herself. We begin on the House floor where the first votes of the week have been set for 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So any votes on a motion to vacate or any related procedural votes could happen as early as this evening. Here's what Representative Gaetz had to say.
I rise to raise a question. What was the secret side deal on Ukraine? House Democrats and President Biden have said that as Speaker McCarthy was asking Republicans to vote for a continuing resolution so as to avoid having to take the Senate's plus up in Ukraine money, that the Speaker of the House was actually cutting a side deal to bring Ukraine legislation to this floor with President Biden and House Democrats. So let me get this straight. To extend Joe Biden's spending and Joe Biden's policy priorities, the Speaker of the House gave away to Joe Biden the money for Ukraine that Joe Biden wanted. It is going to be difficult for my Republican friends to keep calling President Biden feeble while he continues to take Speaker McCarthy's lunch money in every negotiation. The Speaker of the House has responded to these reports of a secret side deal on money for Ukraine, opaquely stating that he still wants to fund Ukraine and our border. I have a few replies to this statement. First, the Speaker's statement confirms the existence of a secret deal. And I have talked to members of our own leadership who have said they didn't even know that Speaker McCarthy was negotiating a secret side deal outside of our conference, outside of his own leadership team, for the sake of Ukraine. Second, Ukraine has lost the support of a majority of the majority. The last time there was a freestanding Ukraine vote on this floor, it was last week. 101 Republicans voted for it, 117 Republicans voted against it. According to the Hastert rule, which Speaker McCarthy agreed to in January, you cannot use Democrats to roll a majority of the majority, certainly on something as consequential as Ukraine. So for all the crocodile tears about what may happen later this week about a motion to vacate, working with the Democrats is a yellow brick road that has been paved by Speaker McCarthy, whether it was the debt limit deal, the CR, or now this secret deal on Ukraine. Third, this is swampy log rolling. The American people deserve single subject bills. I get that a lot of folks might disagree with my perspectives on the border or on Ukraine, but can we at least agree that no matter how you feel about Ukraine or the southern border, they each deserve the dignity of their own consideration and should not be rolled together where they might pass where each individually wouldn't? This is what we're trying to get away from. This is the spirit of the January agreement we made with the Speaker. No more lashing these disparate issues together so that the American people's interests are subjugated here on the floor of the House. You know how we should stand up for our border? Demand that the United States Senate take up our single subject appropriation bill that funded the border. It created Republican unity. We voted for it. It has the policy demands that the continuing resolution that Speaker McCarthy advocated for on this floor did not. Our DHS funding bill requires E-Verify. And then hours later, after we passed that, the Speaker wanted us to vote for a continuing resolution that didn't include E-Verify. Retreat is never a strategy to win anything. So, Mr. Speaker, just tell us, what was in the secret Ukraine side deal? What commitments were made to President Biden to continue the spending of President Biden in exchange for doing things for President Biden? It is becoming increasingly clear who the Speaker of the House already works for, and it's not the Republican conference. Mr. Speaker, I would ask that these questions be answered soon, because there may be other votes coming today or later this week that could be implicated by the answers to these questions. Members of the Republican Party might vote differently on a motion to vacate if they heard what the Speaker had to share with us about his secret side deal with Joe Biden on Ukraine. I'll be listening. Stay tuned.
Florida Republican Matt Gaetz on the House floor earlier today, and you heard him refer to that so-called secret deal between Speaker McCarthy and the Democrats on aid to Ukraine. That was something that was notably left out of the short-term government funding bill passed over the weekend. President Biden criticized Republicans about it before signing the bill yesterday. Well, today at the White House, Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre talked about that with reporters.
Just to follow up on that, the president said yesterday that, we're going to get it done when asked about aid for Ukraine. How can he be so sure, though, especially given the Speaker's potentially perilous future?
Because the Speaker has said himself yesterday that he wants to continue to support Ukraine, to make sure that they have the weapons that they need. He has said it multiple times, even yesterday. We've seen bipartisanship on this issue, to continuing the funding for Ukraine. This is, the president said it. The Speaker and the overwhelming majority of the Congress have steadfastly supported Ukraine. So there is a bipartisan support for this from the beginning. It's going to continue. We've heard from Republicans and Democrats in Congress, and that's what we expect.
And on the Speaker's future, does the president think that Democrats should bail out Kevin McCarthy if it comes to that? Should Democrats help him stay in that role?
So the president was asked this question yesterday by one of your colleagues, and he said he doesn't have a vote, right? That's something for House Republicans to figure out. What the president's going to continue to do is deliver for the American people. While they are clearly showing chaos and not able to do that, deliver for the American people, he's going to focus on growing the economy. He's going to focus on growing the middle class. And as it relates to anybody else, the Democrats, that's their decision to make. That's for Democratic leadership and House Democrats themselves to figure that out.
Actually, the president doesn't have a vote here, but surely this is something that the White House is discussing with leadership on the Hill.
Absolutely. That is not something There's
no conversation between
that is something we do not get involved when it comes to leadership conversation. That is something for House Democrats, House Republicans in this particular instance to figure out.
And can you just clarify one more thing, because we've heard Matt Gaetz and others put a lot of attention on this. What exactly did the president mean yesterday when he was asked if he could trust the Speaker on the next deal, and he said, we just made one about Ukraine? We just heard Matt Gaetz again on the floor insisting there's been some secret deal made between the president and the Speaker.
I'll leave Matt Gaetz to speak for himself and what he meant on whatever he just said right now. I hadn't had a chance to listen to the congressman because I was getting ready to come out here. Look, I mean, just on trust more broadly, I know we've been asked that question. Look, it's not about trust. It's about Congress doing their basic duty is to keep the government open. That's what this was about. When it relates to what the president said, I'm certainly not going to go beyond what he said. But what we know is that there's bipartisan support for this deal. Again, Speaker McCarthy was on the air multiple times yesterday saying that he certainly wants to continue support for Ukraine to get the weapons that they need. And so we're going to hold him to that. That is something that he has said. That is a commitment that he has made.
When the president said we just made a deal about Ukraine.
What I'm saying is that there's been a bipartisan focus and agreement to continue the funding for Ukraine. That is what we're looking at. That is what we're speaking to, and that's what we're going to see.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre at today's press briefing. You can see the entire briefing at cspan.org. House Republican leadership responded today to Representative Gaetz's words. Majority Leader Steve Scalise saying on X, quote, "We have a lot of work to do. Now is not the time for distractions. I'm committed to continuing to work with Speaker McCarthy and our entire leadership team on reducing spending, securing our border, and fighting for hardworking Americans." Tom Emmer, the majority whip, said, quote, tested and proven. That has been the theme of our House Republican majority under Speaker McCarthy's leadership. I'm proud to support the Speaker as we continue championing conservative priorities that will put our country on a better path. And Conference Chair Elise Stefanik said, quote, Speaker McCarthy and the House GOP have consistently delivered strong results for the American people. I support Speaker McCarthy as we continue to work to save America from the far-left Democrats led by Joe Biden. And chiming in on this on the House floor, California Republican Tom McClintock.
Yet now, we are faced with the threat that a Republican will move to vacate the Republican Speaker of the House. It will only require 4 other Republican members to join the Democrats to achieve this result. The immediate effect will be to paralyze the House indefinitely because no other business can be taken up until a replacement is elected. Just when we are on the verge of completing the appropriations process that in turn will finally initiate discussions with the Senate that are vital to change the dangerous path that our country is on. I cannot conceive of a more counterproductive and self-destructive course than that. The supreme irony is that this is being initiated by self-described conservatives. Do they honestly believe that when the Democrats side with them to remove a Republican speaker, that they will then side with them to name a more conservative replacement? Of course not. The Democrats will certainly recruit the most liberal Republicans to establish a left-of-center coalition to run the House. This is exactly what happened in California in 1994. A coalition speaker will move the administration to the House sharply to the left and effectively end the Republican House majority that the people elected in 2022. I implore my Republican colleagues to look past their prejudices, their passions, their errors of opinion, their local interests, and their selfish views, and to make a wise decision when it's needed most at this critical moment in the life of our country. I yield back.
And as for Speaker McCarthy himself, yesterday on Face the Nation, he called the leadership challenge against him, quote, personal. And he spoke about it more today outside his office at the Capitol.
Are you saying that you will not cut a deal with Democrats in order to stay Speaker?
Look, I think this is about the institution. I think it's too important. So anytime that somebody has an ethics complaint and they can't get the way they want about it, they want to roll up and the other side's going to part with 5 people inside that. I don't think that's good for the House. I believe Nancy Pelosi for the last 2 speakers has always been and said, this isn't good for the House. We have to correct this. So.
And here's NBC News senior congressional correspondent Scott Wong on just how real the threat to Kevin McCarthy's speakership is and who Republicans could turn to unite their conference.
We're a lot of steps away from that scenario, but clearly we have to look to the number 2 Republican leader, Steve Scalise, notably from Louisiana. Notably, he is battling and receiving treatment for blood cancer, which he announced just a short few weeks ago. Tom Emmer, the Republican whip, the number 3 leader, certainly would be a name that is in contention. He does have some conservative allies, although there are some conservative groups who do question how conservative his record is. But he does have people like Andy Biggs, a former Freedom Caucus leader, who he is aligned with, pushing him as a possibility. And then there's, of course, some wild cards, people like Patrick McHenry, the financial services chairman who has served in leadership before, who is an institutionalist, widely respected as a legislator and somebody that knows the conference very well. And others like Tom Cole, who is the Rules Committee chairman, also an institutionalist, very well respected, knows the ins and outs and every nook and cranny of the United States Congress, who would be seen as sort of a placeholder, if you will, while the Republican conference resolves its internal issues and divisions. So those are just some of the names I would throw out there to keep your eye on as this saga moves forward, John.
So let's take a look at it from the other side. Who, if there are Democratic votes to save a McCarthy speakership, if some Democrats cross the aisle and vote to keep him as speaker, who should we be watching? Who's most likely to make that trip across the aisle?
Well, I think it would be the moderates, John. The moderates, looking at the bipartisan problem solvers, the people who meet weekly, Democrats and Republicans, this group of now more than 60 individuals who don't like the chaos that has transpired on Capitol Hill in recent weeks, that want a return to working across the aisle, getting things done. This is the group that's led by Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey and Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, the Republican there. What I'm hearing from moderates is that, and really from Democrats across the spectrum, including progressives, is that they are looking to Hakeem Jeffries right now. And you've sort of laid out earlier about how it would work in the numbers and the fact that Kevin McCarthy would need some Democratic votes in order to survive, or he would need some Democrats to vote present to lower the threshold in order to survive. What Democrats have told me is that they are looking towards their leader, Hakeem Jeffries, to sort of give them direction, give them marching orders about how to proceed. Certainly there would be, in that event, conversations between McCarthy and Hakeem Jeffries. I think a power sharing agreement is something a little bit too far, something out of perhaps a West Wing episode, a little bit too cute, but Democrats certainly would want to extract something from McCarthy, and what that is remains to be seen. I think if it's, an up or down vote on Ukraine aid, that might be not enough for Democrats to get on board and rescue McCarthy. Remember, John, Kevin McCarthy is somebody that Democrats don't trust at all, going back towards his reiterated support for Donald Trump after the January 6th attack on the Capitol. They say President Biden and many Democrats say that he reneged on the deal that raised the debt limit and set spending levels going forward. That's why we're sort of in this situation in the first place. And then finally, Kevin McCarthy has launched in recent weeks this impeachment inquiry into President Biden that Democrats feel is purely political and meant to damage President Biden ahead of 2024. And so for a lot of those reasons, there's just not that much trust and not that much will from Democrats to want to bail out Kevin McCarthy as he heads into this very difficult motion to vacate vote.
NBC News senior congressional reporter Scott Wong on today's Washington Journal. You can see the whole segment at cspan.org/Washington Journal and on the C-SPAN Now free mobile video app. And on the House legislative agenda today, lawmakers are considering 5 bills, including work on a measure limiting the use of educational standards when evaluating candidates for federal cybersecurity positions. Later in the week, they'll consider 2 appropriations bills for fiscal year 2024. Those include spending for the legislative branch and energy and water development. The House is always live on C-SPAN, and you can get full coverage at cspan.org and on the C-SPAN Now mobile video app. You're listening to Washington Today. Welcome back to Washington Today. Former President Donald Trump sat through opening statements in a fraud lawsuit against him in New York City today. The state's lawsuit accuses the former president and his company of deceiving banks, insurers, and others by misstating his wealth for years in financial statements. Before the trial began, the former president spoke to reporters.
This is a continuation of the single greatest witch hunt of all time. We have a rogue judge who rules that properties are worth a tiny fraction, 1/100th, a tiny fraction of what they actually are. We have a racist attorney general who's a horror show, who ran on the basis that she was going to get Trump before she even knew anything about me. She used this to run for governor. She failed in her attempt to run for governor. She had virtually no polling. She came back and she said, well, now I'll go back to get Trump again. And this is what we have. It's a scam. It's a sham. Just so you know, my financial statements are phenomenal. They are actually less in terms of the numbers used than the actual net worth. The actual net worth is substantially more. No bank was affected, no bank was hurt. They don't even know why they have to be involved. And they've so testified. They can't believe that they're involved. because they were paid back on time. There were no defaults. There were no problems. And it was like a perfect client. In the meantime, people are being murdered all over the sidewalks of New York. There was no victim here. The banks were represented by the best, biggest, most prestigious law firms in the state of New York, actually in the country. Some of the biggest and best law firms, in all cases, the biggest and best law firms. That's who represented them. The banks got back their money. Again, there was never a default. There was never a problem. Everything was perfect. There was no crime.
Also speaking today before the trial, New York Attorney General Letitia James.
Donald Trump and the other defendants have committed persistent and repeated fraud. Last week, we proved that in our motion for summary judgment. Today, we will prove our other claims. My message is simple. No matter how powerful you are, no matter how much money you think you may have, no one is above the law. And it is my responsibility and my duty and my job to enforce it. The law is both powerful and fragile. And today in court, we will prove our case. I thank you all for being here. And again, justice will prevail. Thank you.
If he's found guilty, the former president could face up to $250 million in penalties and a ban on doing business in New York State. The trial is scheduled to last into December. After working on Saturday to approve the short-term government funding bill, the Senate is back in tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and they'll swear in a new member, Laphonza Butler. California Governor Gavin Newsom appointed her to fill the seat of the late Dianne Feinstein. She will be only the third African-American woman to serve in the Senate and the first out person of color and the first LGBTQ senator from California. And Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer writing on X today, quote, Senate Democrats are delighted to welcome Laphonza Butler. She joins the Senate at a key time in our nation's history. I'm confident that her breadth of work, acumen, and public service will meet this moment. I look forward to Senator-designate Butler's swearing in this week. Laphonza Butler is president of Emily's List, a group that works to elect Democratic women. And back in June, she addressed a Biden-Harris campaign event on reproductive health care.
Look, friends, I want to end my remarks here quickly, but it is important to me as the leader of an organization that values representation and has focused for 38 years on electing pro-choice women. I know how much it matters for my daughter and for America's daughters to be able to see Vice President Harris at the decision-making table. We know that she takes us in every room she enters. We know she makes us proud in every room she goes. We have seen the Vice President lifting the voices and issues that have not always been addressed in the highest reaches of power in this country. She is a brilliant and qualified Emily's List endorsed candidate from the time she was running for district attorney in San Francisco to now as vice president of these United States. And we are incredibly proud. We are incredibly proud to see her as a partner to President Joe Biden and to see what great work they will continue to do to fight for the freedoms of our children and the generations ahead of us. Thank you all for coming and for the work that I know you will continue to do.
You can see Laphonza Butler's full comments in the C-SPAN video library. And the Los Angeles Times reporting today, quote, Butler's appointment could scramble the 2024 race for Senate that is well underway if she decides to run. Butler has connections that could make her a formidable fundraiser, which would be necessary for any candidate jumping into a race just 6 months before the March primary election. Well, 3 of the leading Democratic candidates in California put forth statements on the appointment. Representative Barbara Lee said, quote, I wish Laphonza well and look forward to working closely with her to deliver for the people of the Golden State. Katie Porter, the Democratic representative, said, quote, Laphonza Butler has spent her entire career standing up for women and working families. Similar statement from Representative Adam Schiff, who said he, quote, looks forward to working closely with her to get things done for California. Laphonza Butler swearing in will be live tomorrow on C-SPAN 2. Vice President Harris and Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff will be there. Today at the White House, as part of Disability Pride Month, President Biden spoke about the Americans with Disabilities Act. He highlighted what his administration has done and will continue to do to protect the rights of those with disabilities.
Folks, for more than 61 million Americans living with disability, these laws are a source of opportunity, meaningful inclusion, participation, respect, as my dad would say, the most important of all, dignity, being treated with dignity. Ensuring the American dream is for all of us, not just for some of us. A bulwark against discrimination and a path to personal independence. And for our nation, these laws are a testament to our character as a people, a triumph of values over selfishness. But of course, these laws didn't bring an end to the work we need to do. Disabled Americans are still 3 times less likely to have a job. They're often earn less for the exact work someone else is doing who's not disabled. Too often, disabled Americans are unable to vote, to get to and from work and school, to enjoy public spaces. But thanks to all of you, we're continuing to make progress. In my first few months in office, I was around to sign an executive order. Proud to do it, establishing a government-wide commitment to advancing equality and equity in federal employment, including for people with disabilities. It brought together the Department of Labor and the Office of Personnel Management to ensure that we're making the federal workplaces all over, fully accessible to people with disabilities. So the dignity and rights of disabled Americans are lifted in every policy we pursue. The whole purpose of engaging my Labor Department is to help protect workers with disabilities and fight to end the unjust employment practices.
President Biden talking about the Americans with Disabilities Act as part of Disability Pride Month. That landmark 1990 civil rights law prohibits discrimination based on disability. You can see today's entire event at cspan.org. Finally, tonight, episode 3 of our series, Books That Shaped America. In partnership with the Library of Congress, we're exploring 10 books from American literature that provoked thought, won awards, led to significant societal changes, and are still talked about today. Tonight, the journals of Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. C-SPAN video journalist Jen Garrett is part of the team working on Books That Shaped America. Jen, what can we look forward to tonight?
Well, there's a lot of really cool pieces that I've been out filming and editing here back at C-SPAN. I went to the Library of Congress and I got to film in their Geography and Map Division vault, which is not somewhere that everyone gets to go. And they pulled out 2 maps for me. One was one that Lewis and Clark went out with. So it's kind of, this is what the country knew about these Western lands that they purchased, Louisiana purchased. This was kind of all that they knew. So you can actually see their handwriting on this map, that they were adding in rivers and streams and other features kind of as they went. And then the other map was an 1805 one that they made while they were out on the journey. So they completely made this map while they were wintering at Fort Mandan, which is kind of in the middle of the Dakotas. That was as far as their boats could get, so they stopped there for the winter. And it's amazing to see the difference between this 1803 map and this 1805 map. The 1803 map literally says conjectural, just kind of across the whole middle of what we think of as the United States now, because people just didn't know. So it was really awesome to see the change of the knowledge that they were bringing back. Some of the other places I went up to Philadelphia, which might be kind of an interesting place. You don't think of Lewis and Clark as being connected to Philadelphia, but in Philadelphia is the American Philosophical Society. And before you had, the National Institute of Science or the Smithsonian or even the Library of Congress, you had the American Philosophical Society. And this was a group of like-minded men at that time who were interested in the sciences and philosophy and kind of furthering their own knowledge. And so Thomas Jefferson, who was president at the time, actually sent Meriwether Lewis up to Philadelphia to meet with members of the American Philosophical Society to study, to learn how not to die in the West. And after they came back, their original journals actually found their way to the American Philosophical Society. So they are the holders of the original handwritten journals that Lewis and Clark made. And one of the things that they have in this collection, aside from the actual journals, is this really large spreadsheet type thing that Lewis and Clark made about Native American tribes that they encountered. And the level of detail is just kind of astounding. It's, not just the tribe name and how many people and what language they spoke, but how many warriors, who did they trade with, where did they kind of move if they moved from place to place, what was the estimate of their property. And the curator that I spoke to there, David Gary, who's the curator, kind of phrased it in an interesting way. He said that, this was an information gathering mission on a lot of fronts, whether biology, geography, but the Native American piece was to let them know, hey, we think that we are sovereigns of this land that you're living on now, but we also want to trade with you. But we also want to know what's going on with you from kind of a national security point of view. So that's something that I don't think people think of like, oh, Lewis and Clark, they went and they mapped things. They also gathered information on a lot of other stuff. And most recently, I was out in Missouri, in St. Charles, which is right outside of St. Louis, at the Lewis and Clark Boathouse and Museum. And the reason I was there was they have a full-size replica of the keel boat, which is the largest boat that Lewis and Clark took with them. It took like 20 people to row it. It had a mast, but, as much as the Missouri River curves and bends, it only worked if they were really completely with the wind. And remember that Lewis and Clark were going against the current for almost their entire outbound journey. So hearing them talk about the different ways that they tried to move this 22-ton boat when it was filled with stuff, they rowed it, they used long poles. Sometimes they got out and pulled it with ropes, which was just kind of crazy to hear. But I've gone like a lot of different places, and those are some of the things that you'll see in tonight's show.
You've been working on this project, including the shows that are coming up. What else have you been working on?
So when I was out in Missouri, I also went up to Hannibal, which some people may know is the birthplace of Samuel Clemens, later known as Mark Twain, because we are also doing Huckleberry Finn. And I spoke to the woman who started a museum there called Jim's Journey and kind of talks about the African-American people, enslaved and free, that Mark Twain knew, and one of the people who was probably the inspiration for the character of Jim. Interestingly enough, also while I was at the Library of Congress Geography and Maps Division, I filmed what's called a literary map for Huckleberry Finn. And this was made as kind of like a promotional calendar type thing. But it kind of tracks, like you can see the river, but along the river there's these beautiful little illustrations kind of showing different parts of the book. So I haven't edited that yet because it doesn't air until October 23rd. So right now I'm working on Frederick Douglass, which airs next week. I did a walking tour up in Baltimore talking about his arrival as a young boy, and then his later return to Baltimore as a younger man, working as a shipbuilder, and eventually his escape from slavery to freedom.
You mentioned Mark Twain and other episodes we have coming up. Is there anything so far that you have shot that you loved but ended up on the cutting room floor for this series, either tonight or any of the other episodes that we have coming up, or previous episodes?
Well, kind of to be determined what will be on the cutting room floor for the later episodes, but one of the pieces that didn't quite make it into two pieces didn't quite make it into the show tonight just because we have so much other rich material. Also, while I was up at the Philosophical Society in Philadelphia, if people watched the first episode with Thomas Paine, you saw an author named Stephen Fried who wrote a book on Dr. Benjamin Rush, who is probably like a lesser-known founding father and was a member of the Philosophical Society and a medical doctor. He was in communication with Thomas Paine and kind of helped get Common Sense published. But he's got a connection to Lewis and Clark because Thomas Jefferson knew Benjamin Rush, and Benjamin Rush was one of the people Jefferson wanted Meriwether Lewis to talk to about how to survive while they were out on this journey. And one of the really interesting things was, the state of medicine at the time was not obviously where it is today, not where it was even at the Civil War, where they were figuring out germ theory and such. So purging was still kind of a go-to for, there's something wrong with you. Well, let's just get everything out. And so Benjamin Rush gave Meriwether Lewis what were called at the time Thunderbolt pills, for essentially just mercury. And one of the things I found in the research that I was doing for this is that's part of why we know exactly where Lewis and Clark went, because there's a trail of mercury from them taking these pills and it processing through their body. So that was really interesting to learn. But also just more in depth about, seeing the actual journals. There's a lot more to say about. There's this map that I use that is in the opening vignette that you'll see tonight when talking about them going up the Missouri River. I used a shot that I filmed out in Missouri of the river, overlaid with a map that they actually drew of the Missouri River from their original journals. So trying to work those other little bits into the show kind of where I can.
A Trail of Mercury. That is very interesting. Books that shaped America on the travels of Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. You can watch and listen live tonight starting at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on C-SPAN. Listen here on C-SPAN Radio and watch on demand at cspan.org and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. Jen Garrett, C-SPAN video journalist, thanks a lot for talking to us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
And be sure to check out our Books That Shaped America podcast. It's a companion to the series. This week we're talking to Lanny Jones, who wrote the book The Essential Lewis and Clark. We'll post a new podcast each week giving background information about the authors and books we're featuring on the show. You can find the Books That Shaped America podcast wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find it at cspan.org/podcasts and on the podcast tab of the C-SPAN Now mobile app. That's also where you can find this program as a podcast. It's also on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And for more on the stories that are shaping Washington every day, get our free daily email, word for word. You can go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe to that. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.